And Sarvatma Prabhu invited me last evening to speak this morning on the Srimad Bhagavatam, so I was a little reluctant. I haven't been able to hear any of the recent classes, and I enjoy that more, but I accepted the invitation, so here we are this morning. I'm grateful that you all would join. I'll begin with a little bhajan, Srila Prabhupada's Jai Radha Madhava, and then we'll have a little Mangal Charan and get into the verse. I don't have any instruments with me as we traveled. We're here in our cozy little quarters in Peru Prabhu's home. So it'll just be a cappella this morning. Anybody that wants to join on the other side of their camera, of course, you're welcome. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Shri Radha Damodar ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. I'm going to begin with a little Mangala Charan now as well. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Narom Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Mudirayat. Nasta Prestu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Utamashloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatyadesh Tarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Shri Chaitanya Prasadena Tadrupa Savanirnayan Balapi Kurute Shastram Drisra Vrajavilasani Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swavadantikam. Just to answer a brief question in the chat, I don't think I'll be able, I'll need to share my screen as long as people don't need to see the verse that I'll bring up. But if that would be wanted, then I could share my screen for that. But I don't have any slides or a PowerPoint as such. Okay, again, welcome to those who are just joining. Okay, there's the verse also. Thank you, Tarka Prabhu. I was invited, my name's Deva Madhava Das, invited by His Grace Sarvatma Prabhu yesterday to share something from the Srimad Bhagavatam. So very happy to be with you all. And I have felt blessed already by the devotees of Gita Nagari Dham. It's been a wonderful visit. I have never properly come, just a few fleeting passing moments here, but this has been a few saturated days and it's felt very uplifting. So I seek the continued blessings of the devotees of Gita Nagari here, so that we can share something uplifting from the Bhagavatam, and I hope that we can have a discussion as well. That's always Katayantas Jamanityam Tusyanticha Ramanticha. That's where the real satisfaction and happiness comes from, as Krishna encourages us. The only place he actually talks about happiness in the whole of the Gita directly, that Ramanti, comes from this churning, this discussion back and forth, sharing of realizations. Srila Prabhupada, even in the word for word translation, says preaching to one another, the preaching, enlivening one another about Krishna, not necessarily that preaching is only a conversion experience. Somebody knows nothing and now they know something about Krishna. That's kind of the shallow understanding, but preaching is a continuous experience of reception and offering between realized souls also. So we hope to have some churning back and forth with you all today. We'll come to the verse. And as is there in the chat, we're in 5th canto, chapter 10, text 9. And we're hearing now, the conversation is shifting from Maharaj Rahugana's sarcastic addressing of the famed Brahmin Jadbharat, and building up to this moment, this very pivotal moment in the 5th canto. We've been hearing of the life and pastimes of Bharat Maharaj and his various ups and downs in Krishna consciousness, even as a very realized person. He's still refining his bhakti project and it's coming to a head now. And that fructification, that realization that he's attained through his trials and determined faith is now going to be poured out and offered to Maharaj Rahugana, who is seeing what apparently to his eyes is just a kind of dull person, a dull man who doesn't need to be given much regard. And kings especially have this tendency to disregard. Kings, people in positions of power and influence, they get intoxicated by that. And throughout the Bhagavatam, we see that folly taking place several times over. Indradev will disregard the garland from the sage, his own spiritual master, and folly ensues. And the lesson has to be learned that pride and this overestimation of one's own value relative to anyone else, what to speak of someone like your spiritual master or a Brahmin of the caliber of Jadbharat, overestimation of your own prowess and position relative to anyone else, but then especially those who deserve utmost respect, is always going to bring consequences. Of course, Indra's most famous expression of that is his overestimation of Krishna in the pastime of Indra trying to kill all of the Brajvasis in his rage and his attempt to demonstrate, I'm the doer, I'm the controller. Ishvar aham bhogi, as Shukadev begins his contribution, his narration in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the common understanding as it's spoken, Shukadev to Parikshit, although we shouldn't forget that the Bhagavatam we hear is Sutta Goswami to Shaunaka, but Shukadev Goswami begins by describing this dynamic that all of the conditioned souls are thinking, I'm the controller and I'm the enjoyer. And Maharaj Rahugana, although a cultured person, supposed to be elevated, supposed to be capable of leading the society, supposed to be sober against these things, and thereby protecting all others, is himself betraying a certain weakness in his attempt to betray or demonstrate power, in his attempt to show prowess and kind of belittle the people beneath him. Then he's actually showing that he himself is weak and not realized to the degree that is necessary. So it's an interesting juxtaposition here. This pastime taking place on the narration of which almost immediately after we just heard about Jadbharat being completely indifferent to his own life and these dacoits that were about to kill him. They were going to sacrifice him on the altar of Kali, and he seemed okay with that. He had no problem with the consequences of that situation as it was about to be played out by these bandits. And Durga Devi herself had to intervene there. So then a question comes in this section, in this moment, in this exchange right now, as Maharaj Rahugana is chiding and chastising and teasing Jud Bharat for being such a poor palanquin carrier, such a simple task. Anybody can do it, especially a guy as big and as stocky and as stout as you. So how can you not do this? How are you failing in this task to put one foot in front of the other? Just makes no sense. And it also, from one side, makes no sense why Jud Bharat would suddenly come to life. He now is not only going to respond to another living entity, which is something that he's been reticent to do, according to the descriptions previously offered. Not only has he been reticent to be responsive to anyone, but he's going to respond with tattva gyan. He's going to bring the heat, so to speak. He's going to preach to Maharaj Rahugana. He's going to give him something, some real treasure, not just some indifferent cursory exchange, but he's going to offer him Krishna consciousness. And that might spark a question in our heart. Why? Why this person? Ultimately, that's Jud Bharat's prerogative. That's his estimation as to who to offer to and who to not offer to. And this dispensation of the mercy is left by Krishna to his devotees. And Srila Prabhupada even goes so far as to remark in the Bhagavad Gita, in his purports, that the devotee is more merciful than Krishna because they know the purpose for which the Lord is operating. The ultimate purpose of the creation, this is in, Prabhupada gives us in the 3rd chapter in that series of verses, where Krishna himself says to Arjuna, hey, leave everyone alone, just let everybody do their thing, as might be said in modernity. Just let everybody do their thing. Slowly but surely they'll get back to me. Slowly but surely they'll come into the realization of their actual identity. And in the purports, Prabhupada points out that the preachers, the devotees, they don't let everyone do their thing. They come in and suggest a different thing that should be done. They come in and offer an alternative, sometimes subtly, sometimes abrasively, sometimes very directly, sometimes in an affronting way, sometimes in a slow and steady way. The devotees, one angle of vision for the Srimad Bhagavatam, because it's offered by Vyasadeva also. He's one of these speakers in a sense. Srila Vyasadeva is a disciple of a certain person, Srila Narad Muni. And as we hear, it's not possible to glorify the Lord, Bhagavan, without glorifying his bhakta, his devotee, and particularly our spiritual master. So Vyasadeva has a certain darshan of the reality of Krishna, of the Lord, and it comes through Srila Narad Muni. And so more so than even Krishna himself, Narad Muni appears in the Srimad Bhagavatam, preaching in so many different ways, subtle, overt, gross, even externally appearing sinful. We were just reading the 10th canto, and there's a wonderful verse in the Padma Purana that if a devotee performs sinful activity for the pleasure of Krishna, it becomes devotional service. And if a normal person performs dharma, but for their own pleasure, then it becomes sin. So one of the prime examples of this is Narad Muni's preaching to Kamsa. Kamsa, engage. What is preaching? Actually, preaching is not converting somebody to a particular aesthetic. You're in this room now, you're wearing these clothes now, you have this haircut now. That's not preaching. Preaching means engaging people in the service of the Lord, engaging in the pastimes of Krishna, of Mahaprabhu, of their devotees. So Kamsa was preached to by Narad Muni when he was riled up, his internal anxieties were churned, his fear of the children of Devaki was agitated to the point that he began to kill them, because he was influenced by the truthful behavior of Vasudeva, such that he was thinking, maybe I don't, I'll wait it out a little bit. I don't need to act in this ugly way, this unbecoming way that might bring infamy to me until like it's absolutely necessary. Let me just wait on it, keep things. Bad news comes of its own accord, as Vidura says in the 1st canto. So I won't behave badly until I absolutely have to. And Narad Muni and the Devatas, they were getting a little worried that Krishna's pastimes might not come through and come out. So Narad Muni came in and agitated Kamsa to behave like and commit infanticide. That was Narad Muni's devotional service that day. We can't imagine the unconventional nature and vision of the pure devotee. And yet we have Krishna's pastimes as a result, his Vraja Leela, his Leela of appearing in Mathura, as a result of Narad Muni's very unconventional behavior. Again, today we're hearing about some very unconventional behavior from Jad Bharat and Maharaj Rahugana's reception of this preaching, which again, juxtaposed next to Jad Bharat's relative indifference to everyone else prior, should bear the question in our heart, why Maharaj Rahugana? Why now? And one consideration we might have, based on a dynamic we see across the Srimad Bhagavatam, is the importance of the relationship between the Brahmanas and the Kshatriyas. And the Brahmanas' awareness that they have a responsibility, they have a duty to see to it that the people in general are elevated in spiritual knowledge, and the conduit, the mechanism for that administration of spiritual knowledge is the Kshatriya. So in several places, although Srila Prabhupada, of course, said we are making Brahmanas, that is our purpose, the Krishna conscious society. In several places in the Srimad Bhagavatam, particularly fourth canto, where the pastimes of Prithu Maharaj are being narrated, the great Raja Rishi, who's an incarnation of God, a Shaktivesha avatar, Prabhupada says there in several places that until the Kshatriyas become Krishna conscious, until the ruling class becomes Krishna conscious, the planet in general will not experience the auspicious atmosphere that we would expect and want from the Krishna consciousness movement. So perhaps this is one of the reasons that suddenly Jad Bharat has come to life, that Maharaj Rahugana has some influence, he bears some responsibility beyond his own arrogance and ignorance and just let another arrogant, ignorant fool in this material world carry on, who cares? That's how Jad Bharat has gone on for so long. Now suddenly he's turning on and addressing Maharaj Rahugana, in part because of this dynamic between the Brahmanas. Let me give some mercy to this guy, because by giving mercy to this guy, many other people will also receive mercy. So we'll come to the verse, we'll chant the verse and that was the preamble, so to speak, and we'll have a brief purport from Srila Prabhupada. Brahmana uvacha tvayoditam vyaktam avipraladham pralabdham vartu sameshyad yadi virabharaha gantur yadishyad adighamyam adva piveti rasona vidham pravadaha. The great Brahman Jad Bharat said, "My dear king and hero, whatever you have spoken sarcastically is certainly true. Actually, these are not simply words of chastisement, for the body is the carrier. The load carried by the body does not belong to me, for I am the spirit soul. There is no contradiction in your statements, because I am different from the body. I am not, the carrier of the palanquin. The body is the carrier. Certainly, as you have hinted, I have not labored carrying the palanquin, for I am detached from the body. You have said that I am not strong and stout. I'm not stout and strong, and these words are befitting a person who does not know the distinction between the body and the soul. The body may be fat or thin, but no learned man would say such things of the spirit soul. As far as the spirit soul is concerned, I am neither fat nor skinny. Therefore, you are correct when you say that I am not very stout. Also, if the object of this journey and the path leading there were mine, there would be many troubles for me. But because they relate not to me, but to my body, there is no trouble at all. Sometimes Srila Prabhupada's translations appear a little truncated compared to the verse, and sometimes they seem elongated as compared to the verse. So in this, it's almost a paragraph, a very long verse for a relatively standard Sanskrit translation. So Srila Prabhupada is weaving into his translation the context of the play on words that Jad Bharat is making relative to Maharaj Rahugana's statements, that Maharaj Rahugana was teasing him about not being very stout and not walking the path very appropriately, and the consequences of these things. Are you not able to do it? Is it difficult for you, even though he's like a hulking tank of a man? And so in his response, Judd Bharat is saying all the things you're sarcastically trying to chastise me about are actually true if you consider the truth of the soul. And so Srila Prabhupada weaved that in to his translation to remind us of that context, the kind of irony that's being spoken to in a tongue-in-cheek way by Judd Bharat. So Srila Prabhupada's purport, in the Bhagavad Gita, it is stated that one who is advanced in spiritual knowledge is not disturbed by the pains and pleasures of the material body. The material body is completely separate from the spirit soul, and the pains and pleasures of the body are superfluous. The practice of austerity and penance is meant for understanding the distinction between the body and the soul, and how the soul can be unaffected by the pleasures and pains of the body. Judd Bharat was actually situated on the platform of self-realization. He was completely aloof from the bodily conception, and therefore he immediately took this position and convinced the king that whatever contradictory things the king had said about his body did not actually apply to him as a spirit soul. So Srila Prabhupada is offering in his purport, clarity of Judd Bharat's direction. Where is he going with this? Over the course of this conversation, he's going to call Maharaj Rahugana's attention to the importance of the spirit soul and how our framing of reality, our understanding of existence, should begin from there. All other considerations will just lead to trouble. They'll just be in the ultimate untruths: fat and skinny, young and old, rich and poor, black and white, some nationality, some gender. All these things will lead us to more trouble, more confusion, more pain, anxiety, unless our consideration of them is first beginning from the truth of the soul. Then from that foundation, we can deal in a healthy way with those other dynamics as much as we may need to. But if we don't understand the soul's presence first and its reality and its implications, then everything else is just going to cause issue. So, of course, Maharaj Rahugana was not considering the soul when addressing Judd Bharat. And so Judd Bharat is in a tongue-in-cheek way saying that you're right, but only because you were wrong. You weren't aware of your own rightness, but because I'm aware of the soul, I'm aware of the implications of the presence of the soul, I can take your words as truth. So don't worry. You were wrong, but you're still right because I understand how things really work. So this kind of treatment is not something a king is used to. And of course, it's going to agitate Maharaj Rahugana and strike him and cause him to appreciate who and what is actually in front of him, something very different from what he expected, who he expected when he was looking down at the dull appearing form of Judd Bharat. The classic saying, do not judge a book by its cover. It's even more dangerous to judge a bhakta by their cover. One experience I have of this that's coming to mind, I would often go to New York City in my early days of Krishna consciousness, 2011. I joined in 2010. So then 2011 to 2016 or so, I was going from Michigan back and forth to New York City a week out of every month to support Ram Roy Prabhu and the Harinam program that he has there. They're 10 years plus now. I'm sure all of you are familiar with that by now, the wonderful service those devotees are doing everyday Harinam in New York City, where Srila Prabhupada started it all. And I would go, and so we were sitting on the mat one day in Union Square, and Srila Prabhupada started the movement there. It's New York City, a huge place, so many devotees all the time coming, passing by, saying hi. And many of them that come by and say hello to Ram Roy Prabhu, they don't appear to be practicing per se anymore, or at least not in an official way, especially in my early days, ISKCON, New Bhakta kind of mentality. A lot of the devotees that would come appeared to be a little on the fringe, as we say, the fringies, or even, dare I say, blooped. So one day we were sitting on the mat, and one such devotee appeared to come. He was wearing like cut off shorts, and he had a kind of a like a ratty t-shirt on, and he was older, no tilak, no he did have kunti on. He had his tulsi beads on, but nothing else particularly indicated like, oh, here's a devotee. If you're just walking by, you wouldn't necessarily notice them as such. And he and Ram Roy Prabhu had a very friendly embrace. And then that devotee sat down and he led a nice kirtan. And I thought, oh, this is nice. It seemed like they hadn't seen each other in a while. So I thought maybe this is one of Ram Roy Prabhu's old Sankirtan friends, because he used to serve in New York and collected for Brooklyn Temple. And maybe this was one of his old Sankirtan buddies and they hadn't seen each other in a while, and sweet exchange and Haribol. I hope one day that devotee begins practicing against, seriously. That was my arrogant assumption and offering of a blessing to this devotee. And he walked away, and we never saw him again for 6 months or so, until I happened to go to Vrindavan. I was making my fortunate yearly pilgrimage to India, and there I was in Krishna Balaram Mandir in Vrindavan just after the morning program, and a devotee grabs the microphone to make the morning announcements, and there is that same fringy devotee who I saw in Union Square, hugging Ram Roy Prabhu, what I thought was for the first time in many years. Turns out that's the temple president of Krishna Balaram Mandir in Vrindavan, His Grace Panchagoda Prabhu, a very beloved devotee, very serious devotee, wonderful devotee who's managed Krishna Balaram Mandir for many years now, to the appreciation of his godbrothers and the whole movement. And my assumption, my judgment of the book by its cover, the Bhakta by their cover, just collapsed. And I realized how silly I had been, how foolish, how dangerous my assumptions had been, thinking that I knew who this person was just by a cursory, observation of their behavior, and created this whole story in my head about them. And that whole story was shattered right in front of me in Braj. And it was a very sweet experience to have, because in Vrindavan, it was one of my first times. I think it must have been my second visit, but actually it was my first visit to Vrindavan. So it was my second visit to India, but it was my first visit to Vrindavan. And those of you who have been to the Dham, hopefully all of you, and if not, I hope that you're able to go soon, that it's confronting to see the kind of external condition of India, and then even the Dham, Vrindavan, Mayapur, Puri. We read Krishna book and we hear about Chintamani Dham and, gems for flowers and the land of milk and honey. And every step is a dance and every word is a song. But then you get to Vrindavan and all you hear is horns and traffic and the screaming of people on the streets. And it's not as apparently sanctimonious as we would expect and like. And in order to penetrate and start to enter into the real mood of the Dham, it takes a deep sense of faith and a little intellectual adjustment, a little putting aside of the external confronting elements. And I took this as grace on me, as a cue from the Lord through his devotees to not judge the bhaktas by their cover, to not judge the Dham by its cover, this Prodamaya covering, as Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains about Navadvip. And the covering, the layer of Maya that covers the actual internal energy of the Lord that manifests as the Dham, is covered by this thin layer of Maya. And some exist on that thin layer, and some understand and are experiencing the reality beneath. And I was being invited into that by this mistaken assessment of Panchagoda Prabhu and the truth of his actual persona, not to do the same to any of the other devotees, especially in Vrindavan, especially in Braj, where the most unconventional Krishna conscious behavior is being executed. Why? Because the devotees in Braj break every convention of religion, in that they don't even worship God because he's God. In fact, they don't even know God is God. In some sense, it can be said that Mother Yashoda is in more illusion than I am, because at least I have some idea. I have some faith even. That's what moves me in my bhakti, is that Krishna's God. But Mother Yashoda has completely forgotten that. If she ever knew it, she's forgotten it, because she cannot think Krishna is God and at the same time think that Krishna needs her to feed him. Krishna needs her to bathe him. Krishna needs her to clothe him. When she stands in a puddle of her own tears every day as Krishna walks away to go herd the cows, thinking, how will he eat? What if he steps on some thorn or some sharp edge or rock and becomes hurt? The dust and the hot sun, all these abrasive things pushing on my child. What if some demon comes again? What if some calamity happens and I never see my little Lala again? There's Mother Yashoda standing in a puddle of her own tears every day. If she had any idea of who Krishna actually was, she'd never be able to experience that intensity of prema, that intensity of emotion. So she's in some sense in more illusion than I am, more illusion than we are. The most unconventional expression of religion, of bhakti, and that's every creeper, every flower, what to speak of the more expressed devotees like Mother Yashoda, the Gopas, the Gopis in Vrindavan. So if we want to enter that place, which of course is our community's prayojana, this is the goal, that we don't want to go to Vaikuntha where God is big and we are small and forever we are aware of that. And in that we experience the joy of Aishvarya, awe and reverence. We want to be overwhelmed by Madhurya. We want to be overwhelmed by the sweet affection, not the awe and reverence, but the affection of the Brajvasis who are chasing after Krishna to try to do something for him because they think he needs something, because they don't know he's God. So to enter into that unconventional space, it's important that we learn to live unconventionally in our Krishna consciousness and don't believe the shallow expression, don't believe the surface level idea that's put to us. Maharaj Rahugana was believing the surface level expression of Jad Bharat, and now by Jad Bharat's kindness, he's being broken of that conventional understanding and welcomed into a higher experience, ultimately for his own benefit. A kind of a closing idea, maybe and then we'll go to some reflections and comments from the devotees, and if by chance there's some questions. There's a tendency always towards convention. Our conditional nature assumes that because it's easier, it's much tidier to just assume convention and then to go along with that ourselves. And Kapila Dev warns of this in his discussion with Devahuti. Ironically, Devahuti was believing in convention herself, being a wife, dutiful, and now I've lived a life of enjoyment. And my husband is left to go be a sadhu in the woods, but I'm just, still stuck here at home, and there's nothing for me to do but, watch Netflix and vacuum, and that's not going to get me back to Godhead. There's nothing for me to do but just continue to enjoy my material life, which is basically a hollow shell of what it was, because now my husband's also gone. And what am I going to be left with at the time of death? And as she was lamenting in this way, it said that Kapila, he slightly smiled before beginning to speak to her, because Kapila is an incarnation of the Lord, and he's thinking, you're my devotee. I'm your child. That's how much I'm endeared to you, and you are endeared to me. There's no question of you being confused in this way, but here you are in your own humility, buying into this kind of conventional idea that your life is useless because you lived it from the position of a householder, and what to do now. So I will indulge you in this conversation. I'll share with you this knowledge, but you already understand it. You're my devotee. So in his explanation to his mom, he warns of this Gramya Dharma, conventional, Gramya, Prabhupada's translation there, conventional religion. And ironically, conventional religion, although we might assume it's related to practices because that's conventionally the understanding of religion, what it's implying is conventional conception. The conception that I have to do and say and look a particular way, and then I'm following. Then I'm a part of the community. And if I'm not doing or saying or looking a particular way, then I'm outside of the proper religious experience. I'm not realized. And he, in his explanation, Kapila is calling Devahuti's attention to her own apparently poorly situated circumstance as a woman, as a housewife, having never performed any religious effort beyond just the natural dharma of her station, and that dharma is not going to be good enough to get me to where I need to go. He's calling attention to that shallow conception. It's actually not our circumstance in the material energy. It's no particular varna, no particular ashram that gives Krishna. If that were the case, then Krishna would be partial. And as we know, he's impartial. All that it takes, and what it takes actually, is bhava grahi janardana. That's what moves Krishna. And until and unless that comes, until and unless we have that, all our practice is on that level of convention. So in our own ISKCON community also, there's a temptation towards convention. It's natural. As the conditioned souls move forward in the material energy, the religion as it is appears to be lost. As Krishna warns Arjuna in the beginning of the 4th chapter, things will become confused and degraded. That's how it goes. Srila Prabhupada came, he gave us his books, he gave us his personal example, he instructed personally so many disciples, and yet we should not be naive to think that there will not be a tendency towards convention, a tendency towards a shallow truncation of what Krishna consciousness means in preference of a very narrow window of external factors. And if those external factors are there, great. You're a devotee, I'm a devotee. If those external factors are not there, oh, you're not a devotee. It's an easy way to dismiss people and an easy way to feel good about ourselves, but it really corrodes, it eats away at the truth of Krishna consciousness, which breaks all barriers and is beyond all convention. The only ascension to it is affection for Krishna, coming from mercy of the Vaishnavas. And the expression of it can come out in any number of ways. As we mentioned, Narad Muni, his expression of his Krishna consciousness is inciting Kamsa in infanticide. Any religious person from any sect, you don't have to read the Vedas to understand that is just grossly sinful. Except that for Narad Muni, it's his place in the pastimes, and he assumes it boldly, without apprehension, in fact, with eagerness. He assumes that unconventional place in the pastimes. So while the pleasure of Krishna is an objective truth, it's not something subjective that I can just decide. One devotee early on in my Krishna consciousness, I was making some speculation, I don't remember what it was. And he said to me, you can imagine Krishna smoking a cigarette, but that doesn't mean he does. And I took that point. The objective pleasure of Krishna is something true. He has preferences, and those preferences do dictate a reality of behavior. And yet, the common tendency towards externals that the conditioned souls have do not necessarily have a relationship to Krishna's objective desires and pleasures. So in our ISKCON community, in our Gaudiya community, we have to be vigilant against this tendency towards a shallow expression of what Krishna consciousness is. Ironically, sometimes that expression can come out in a mood of fidelity, in a mood of faithfulness and deference. That expression can take hold and then mute and suffocate something more organic and authentic. The early days of our movement, Srila Prabhupada, although speaking about a very diverse and dynamic and well-rounded, rich, textured expression of the Krishna conscious society, in the immediate situation that he was dealing with, he allowed for a very narrow expression of things. Everybody lived in the temple, and if you didn't live in the temple, you basically weren't a devotee. We've all heard of that idea. Now today, that idea it'd be heresy, and appropriately so, because practically all the devotees live outside the temple. And it's an absurd idea to think that we'll make the world Krishna conscious, but at the same time, everybody has to live in the temple. There'll never be enough surface area in the temples for everybody to live in them. So naturally, people have to live outside. And if outside means outside of Krishna consciousness, then we've misunderstood Krishna consciousness. it's a consciousness, not a proximity to any particular part of the material energy. It's not an expression of any particular element of our external experience before and until we've established that sense of purpose in pleasing Krishna. So the early days of the movement, I sometimes compare to World War II. And when the Allied powers were trying to fight the German Axis that had literally taken over every square inch of Eastern Europe, all the way to the West. You had to the beaches of France, to the shores of the ocean, Germany. And now the Americans and allies were going to push back. Their first push was an effort known as D-Day. And at D-Day, everybody was the same. Everybody had one goal, was just to run as fast and as hard as they could for as long as they could. And they're probably going to die. They probably weren't going to make it. The few that did make it would be remembered forever in glory, along with those who didn't. But the purpose of that very one-sided, very homogenized effort of just push was not to be done every day again for the rest of the war, but rather that early push was to be done so that then the variegatedness and diversity of effort that it would take to actually win the war, because war is ultimately a cultural conquest, the variegated effort that would be needed to win the war could then be borne forth because the Allied powers had some land to stand on. They didn't even have land to stand on. How can you fight a war? You don't even have ground underneath your own feet. So the D-Days of our Krishna consciousness movement were the early days of Srila Prabhupada and his direct disciples to give us some land to stand on. And they made such incredible sacrifices. They behaved in many cases so beyond their natural capacity, their nature, as we would say. And we should never discredit that effort as something kind of artificial, or that they were falsely renouncing. They were following the order of their spiritual master, heart and soul, and establishing land for the rest of us to stand on. But now, from my very privileged position, them having made that sacrifice, if I pretended that it's still D-Day and I just go outside with my rifle and bayonet every day and run hard and, see who I can hit, that ironically would be a disservice to that sacrifice that those devotees made. They did that, so I don't have to. In fact, I have to if I want to really say I'm serving the parampara and serving the previous devotees, the previous acharyas. I have to understand and intuit, what is Krishna calling me to do? What is the opportunity I have now because they did that? Srila Prabhupada could cross the ocean because Srila Bhaktisiddhanta crossed India. Every square inch of India had been preached on, and Gaudiya Vaishnavism had been reestablished and agitated in the hearts of Indians in general, and the power and veracity and value of the movement had been reestablished by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Bhaktisiddhanta in India. And Prabhupada took that blueprint, took those specs from the engineer of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's ashram culture, books, temple worship. He established all the basic cultural features that Srila Prabhupada just then exported all over the planet. Prabhupada could do that because Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had done this. So a convention would lead us to just D-Day forever. And it's the vigilance of real disciples to ask, actually, what is the unconventional behavior now being called to me? Very unconventional for Srila Prabhupada to get up on the Jaladuta and go to America, the land of malechas, meat eating, intoxication, gambling. What will I eat? Who will I speak with? I was just marveling just a day ago. It never really occurred to me. We hear Bhaktisiddhanta being criticized for riding in a car. He's a sannyasi riding in a car. This is very unconventional. This is way outside of the Dharma Shastra's litigations. Okay, we understand that. And he broke that convention. But how about Radha Damodar, Shri Radha Damodar, living in a bus and traveling all over America? How unconventional, how absurd that looks from every angle of Vedic culture as we understand it in India. Srila Prabhupada's strategy in Juhu was to establish Radharasa Vihari, even though the property itself, the Juhu property that they were being established on, was legally in jeopardy because of the tricks of Mr. Nair. He established the deity because there's a culture in India. Once the deity's there, nothing else can be. It's forever. The deity is there. So you may have been to India and we were walking down the sidewalk in the middle of Calcutta, and in the middle of the sidewalk in Calcutta, there's a mandir. There's a little altar, and people go and they offer their lamps and their incense and their prayers to a deity in the middle of the sidewalk in Calcutta, because once the deity is there, the deity is there. But Radha Damodar was here, there, and everywhere. So unconventional. And each of us have to ask ourselves, along with our faithfulness and our fidelity to the parampara, is in what way do I need to be unconventional in a faithful way for the service of the Lord today? So I'll stop there, dear devotees, and open it up for any reflections or comments that anyone may have, or by chance a question. And again, thank you for your kind attention. It's a little awkward for me to speak to devotees, some of whom I don't know, and also I like to hear Srimad Bhagavatam and what is the kind of culture of your katha together. I'm not so familiar, so forgive me if I spoke anything that felt off-putting or was dissonant with the general tenor of where the conversation has been so far. Jiva Pandit, Prabhu.
Hi, Krishna Prabhu. Thank you so much for your class. It was very nice to hear from you. I guess have a question in terms of like this point about learning how to be unconventional. I mean, I still haven't like figured out how to word it properly, but I'm going to try. So like, I can see this importance thanks to the examples that you gave about like, not being afraid to like step outside of the box when that's needed. But it's like, for me, I can see that like, I've only been in the movement for a very short amount of time. And it's like, what's been instilled in me and what's like been ingrained in me is that like, I don't know what's best for myself. So I need to just follow, what's being told to me in order to make like spiritual advancement. Like, I don't know anything about anything. So I need to just do what I'm being told in order to like, grow up in spiritual life. But I can see it kind of gets to a point, at least for me, just speaking personally, it's like, okay, I'm doing, everything that I'm supposed to be doing, but I'm not feeling it. It's like there's something missing. And it's like, okay, I don't know if I'm just like beating a dead horse and I'm just trying very hard to make something that isn't working for me work. But it's like, I'm afraid of stepping outside of the box and trying something new because this isn't what everyone else is doing, So it's like, how can we develop that trust in ourselves to like make these kind of decisions and know like, okay, what I'm doing is actually still bona fide. I'm not just going off of like what my mind is telling me to do or, things like that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
I think that's my question.
Yes, I appreciate a few of the phrases you used. This recognition of the need to trust yourself. I'm really glad that you brought that out, because this is tantamount to healthy Krishna consciousness. If we don't trust ourselves, if we don't have faith in ourselves, to use our more conventional term that we associate, trust really means faith. Faith means trust. Trust is the more rubber meets the road term. So I like to use trust anywhere we see the word faith, to really put it on my lap and see, do I have that? I have faith in Krishna, that's easy. But do I trust Krishna? Like I trust the green traffic light, that means I can go and the other people stop. Do I trust Krishna on that level? Maybe not. Do I trust Guru on that level? So trusting myself, faith in myself. Why is that important? Because if I don't have trust in myself, then my so-called faith and trust in Guru and Krishna and the process is really just a projection of my own insecurity. It's a codependency. I need you because I'm not good enough myself. And while ontologically we need Krishna, we need to be harmonized with him, not homogenized, not merging into him. I'm nothing and no one. You are everything. That's not our philosophy. Our philosophy is we have a contribution to make. And that contribution is wholly insignificant. It's completely meaningless, except that it means something to Krishna. He wants it. He's eager to have it. And so therefore it has ultimate, supreme meaning. We have supreme value because the supreme person has decided we do, for no other reason. Not objectively that I have that influence, but because Krishna has decided, and that becomes the truth. So in order to offer myself, I need to be aware of and situated in myself. From that, we have some impetus to become mature. And Srila Prabhupada spoke to this many times, but a place that comes to mind as you were speaking, Jiva, as you were asking your question, is the famous letter to Karandar Prabhu in December of 1972, where Srila Prabhupada is admonishing Karandar Prabhu, who's a brilliant mind, very intellectual and capable person. Karandar Prabhu was once again, it seems, by the tenor of Prabhupada's letter, this was something Prabhupada had tried to address many times. Karandar Prabhu is once again making bureaucracy to an excessive level in the community, trying to make everything the same in ISKCON. And Prabhupada said, this is not what we want. How many times have I told you no? Individual, spontaneous, and voluntary. This is the nature of the seva that we want to inspire from someone's heart. Individual, spontaneous, voluntary. It sits outside of what you were speaking, Jiva, this idea that I'm useless, I know nothing, and I just have to be told what to do because I can't trust my conditioned existence. So that there's some truth to that in the beginning. And I use the example of a university for our ISKCON community. Prabhupada said education is the principal purpose of ISKCON. What's the purpose of educating someone? So that one day they can be the ones doing it without having to have you hold their hand, without having to have you tell them what to do. They can do it on their own and in their own wonderful way. So the first, in a university, Prabhupada said unity and diversity. So we put together this word university, this organizational structure that allows for unity in diversity. The first 4 years of a university are pretty straightforward, and you're being told this, that, the other, and do it that way, not this way, read this, not that, be here on time. And those are necessary years where the student is more or less infantilized. They're paternalized by the institution. They're treated like a child because they mostly still are. When you go to grad school, if you do, now you have a little more say. Now you have influence. Now you're choosing, what do I study? Why do I study it? What contribution can I make? I want to actually make an offering to this field of knowledge. PhD, that's all you're doing. Now you're really trying to create some independent understanding, some novel expression of this body of knowledge. And when you graduate, whether it's as an undergrad or as a PhD, when you leave the university, the expectation is now you go out in the world and show everybody why it's valuable to go to a university. What's good about getting an education, being in that very kind of contextualized space. The purpose is so that when I live the rest of my life, I'm empowered and imbued with an understanding that others don't have, and that makes me more effectual. So the real value and demonstration of the power of ISKCON is shown when people leave ISKCON, when they step outside of the conventional borders. Of course, even within a university, for some people, it makes sense to stay on as a professor, to stay on as a dean, a chancellor, an administrator of some kind. A few people that makes sense for, but imagine a university that tried to keep everybody in it. That's to some degree the conception that has suffocated ISKCON's advancement and development as a society, is we have to keep everyone inside, but there's only so many spots to be temple president or head pujari or Sankirtan leader. There's only so much room in the temple. So by necessity, things are meant to break out and spill out, and that requires a sense of independence from the students, from the members of the society. So my ultimate answer, Jivaji, is you just got to be brave. You have to see that you've gotten yourself this far. of course with help, of course with guidance, of course with support, but ultimately with your own choice to follow those inspirations, follow that good guidance, because the jiva is not imposed upon. Otherwise, it wouldn't be love, as we well know. So the jiva is allowed to choose, and you've chosen to get this far. So have faith and courage in your inspirations, and continue to choose in that direction. And Krishna, he always rewards it, either with adjustment, actually go that way, or yes, this is the way we want you to go, and here's how I'll help you get there. So I hope that was something. Nagaraj Prabhu is appreciating war is ultimately a cultural conquest. Jai. This is from Parameshwari in the temple. Thank you for your unconventional class. Truly appreciate realizations, especially appreciate this point. We want to watch out for the shadow expressions of what Krishna consciousness really is. Thank you, Ma. Parameshwari Devi, thank you. Any other reflections or comments that anyone would like to share?
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Tarika Prabhu.
I'd like to offer a few words. First of all, I thank you for your class. It was stellar.
Oh,
very impressive. I enjoyed hearing your realizations and insights, and very eloquently expressed. I wanted to say, in regard to Jiva Pandit Prabhu's question, which you answered nicely, but I felt that one important element was missing, which is the guidance of the spiritual master. In any discussion of this nature, I just feel that we can't fail to point out the importance of the guidance of the spiritual master, which is essential, critical, and in that relationship, there is no question of obsolescence, or at no point does a disciple ever become actually independent of the spiritual master, but there is always a dependency. And before the spiritual master, the disciple, it would be appropriate to always regard himself as foolish before his spiritual master. So we certainly, in our philosophy, allow for a tremendous amount of independent expression, creativity, and inspiration, but always within the parameters of the instructions of the spiritual master. So there are boundaries that we have to be conscious of and respect. If there's any question ever as to where those boundaries lie, then those are the times that it's appropriate to inquire of the spiritual master. But the spiritual master provides the essential guidance when we have questions like this. What should I do? I have some particular idea. I'm inspired in this particular way. Is this the right thing to do? We don't have to agonize over these things. This is why we have a spiritual master. And we have to take advantage, provided we have a living spiritual master, we should take advantage of the opportunity. To fail to do that is a colossal misfortune. Anyway, that's essentially my thought on that. There's no necessity to ever be in doubt. Just shoot off a letter to your spiritual master, see what he has to say. His particular service is particularly to provide guidance in situations precisely like that.
Yeah, point well taken, Prabhu. Thank you for rounding that out. And we might also add Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, that these elements help to triangulate the jiva's position and our specific jiva, Jiva Pandit Prabhu as well. Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra can bring that clarity to one's own inspiration, but also confusion, so that the proper course can be taken. Thank you very much. I think that's our stopping time there, Sri Sri Radha Damodar. So
thank you again, Prabhu. Fabulous class. I hope we get a chance to hear from you more often.
That's kind of you, Taraka Prabhu. Thank you for that important contribution at the end. Your encouragement.
Hare Krishna.
Gauranga. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Granth Raj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Sri Sri Radha Damodar.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu.
Hari Hari.